Wife abandons husband after heart surgery on Christmas. 18 years later, she returns broke and discovers he is now. On Christmas Eve 2005, William Harrison's world shattered in a hospital room in Burlington, Vermont. His wife's betrayal, delivered through a cold letter while he lay recovering from emergency heart surgery, should have destroyed him. Instead, it became the first note of an extraordinary symphony of redemption that would take 18 years to complete. This Christmas Eve, in the grand ballroom of Burlington's most prestigious hotel, that symphony reaches its final, powerful crescendo. Sometimes the most beautiful music comes from a heart that was once broken. Join us for a story of betrayal, resilience, and justice, served not with vengeance, but with grace. Proving that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch and the legacy we build. This is The Most Precious Gift, a tale that will remind you that sometimes losing everything is just life's way of making room for something far more precious. Christmas Eve 2005 started like any other for William Harrison at St. Mary's Church in Burlington, Vermont. As the school's music teacher, he was leading the final rehearsal for the evening's Christmas concert, his hands moving gracefully across the old piano keys, while 20 children practiced Silent Night. At 55, he had conducted this rehearsal dozens of times over his 22-year teaching career. But this year felt special, maybe because Amanda, his wife, had finally promised to attend. The pain hit him mid-song, sharp, crushing, like nothing he'd ever felt before. His left arm went numb, and the sheet music blurred before his eyes. The last thing he remembered was young Sarah Chen's scream as he slumped over the piano keys, the discordant notes echoing through the church. He drifted in and out of consciousness in the ambulance, catching fragments of urgent voices. Aortic dissection? Emergency surgery? Where's his wife? Through the haze of pain, he heard himself giving the paramedic Amanda's cell phone number. "She needs to be here," he whispered. The emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital was a blur of activity. Nurses cut away his favorite Christmas sweater, the one Amanda had given him last year. Dr. Reynolds, his voice tight with concern, explained they needed to operate immediately. "Mr. Harrison, your aorta is tearing. We're prepping the OR. Is your wife on her way?" William nodded weakly. The nurse had reached Amanda, who said she was gathering his things at home and would come right over. That was 45 minutes ago. As they wheeled him towards surgery, William kept his eyes fixed on the hospital entrance, hoping to see Amanda's familiar figure rushing through the doors. Instead, he saw only the colored Christmas lights reflecting off the falling snow, creating halos in his tear-filled vision. "We can't wait any longer," Dr. Reynolds announced, his face grim. "Nurse Parker, keep trying Mrs. Harrison. Tell her we're taking him to surgery now." The operating room lights were harsh and bright. Someone placed a mask over his face, and the anesthesiologist spoke softly. "Count backward from 10, Mr. Harrison." As the darkness began to close in, William's last conscious thought was of Amanda. Where was she? Why wasn't she here? The surgery lasted 8 hours. 8 critical hours during which William's life hung by a thread. The surgical team worked tirelessly through the night, their Christmas Eve plans forgotten as they fought to repair his torn aorta. Outside in the waiting room, chairs remained empty. No anxious wife pacing the floors, no concerned spouse asking for updates, just Nurse Parker, checking her phone repeatedly for any response to her numerous messages to Amanda Harrison. At 3 a.m., after the 6th unanswered call, Nurse Parker's concern turned to anger. In 20 years of emergency room work, she'd seen many things, but a spouse completely missing during such a critical surgery? That was rare. She watched through the window as the snow continued to fall, coating Burlington in white, and thought about the empty chair in the waiting room where Mrs. Harrison should have been. By dawn on Christmas morning, the surgery was finally complete. Dr. Reynolds emerged from the OR, exhausted but satisfied. "It's a Christmas miracle," he told his team. "He pulled through." The doctor looked around the empty waiting room, his expression darkening. "Has anyone heard from Mrs. Harrison?" Nurse Parker shook her head, clutching her phone. Nothing. Not a single response. As the sun rose over Burlington, casting a pink glow through the hospital windows, William Harrison lay unconscious in recovery, surrounded by beeping monitors and IV drips. The surgery had saved his life, But no one yet knew that this Christmas morning would bring a different kind of pain, one that no surgery could repair. A fresh-faced young nurse was adjusting his pillows when she found it, a white envelope carefully placed where his head would rest. On the front, in Amanda's elegant handwriting, was simply written, "William." The nurse held the envelope uncertainly, looking at her supervisor. Should they wait until he was stronger? But how long could they keep such a thing? And somehow they all knew this wasn't going to be a Christmas card. Chapter 2. The Abandonment. William's eyes fluttered open in the ICU. The first thing he noticed was the pain, deep and constant. The second was the silence, broken only by the steady beeping of monitors. He was alone. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," Nurse Parker said, approaching his bed. "How are you feeling?" Her voice was gentle, but something in her expression made his heart rate spike slightly on the monitor. "Amanda?" He managed to whisper through dry lips. The nurse hesitated, then reached for something on his bedside table. "This was found on your pillow," she said, holding up a white envelope. "We waited until you were stable enough." William's hands trembled as he took the envelope. Even before opening it, he knew. 22 years of marriage had taught him to read Amanda's moods through her handwriting. The sharp angles of these letters spelled trouble. "Would you like me to stay?" Nurse Parker asked. He shook his head, already unfolding the letter. "Dear William, by the time you read this, I'll be in Boston with Richard Maxwell." Yes, that Richard Maxwell, the investment banker who attended our fundraising concert last spring. We've been seeing each other for months. I've thought about this for a long time. You're so consumed with your students and their music that you never noticed how unhappy I've been. Richard offers me the life I've always wanted, not just endless school concerts and budget concerns. I've taken my share of our savings and sold my portion of the music school shares. The money will help us start our new life together. Please don't try to contact me. My lawyer will handle any necessary communications. I'm sorry it had to happen this way, but your surgery made me realize I couldn't wait any longer. Life is too short to settle for less than what you want. Goodbye, Amanda. The monitors began beeping frantically. William's vision blurred, his chest constricting with a pain different from his surgery. He could barely breathe. Nurse Parker rushed in, followed by Dr. Reynolds. "Blood pressure spiking," she announced, reaching for medication. "Mr. Harrison, try to stay calm." But calm was impossible. Through the haze of physical and emotional pain, the implications of Amanda's letter hit him in waves. Their joint accounts, the music school shares, his medical bills, all while he lay helpless in surgery. "We need to sedate him," Dr. Reynolds ordered, noting William's dangerous vital signs. This level of stress could tear the surgical repairs. As the sedation took hold, William's last conscious thought was of the Christmas concert he'd never finished conducting. His students would be waiting, the holiday program they'd practiced for months. He woke hours later to find Dr. Reynolds checking his charts. The room was dark except for the glow of Christmas lights outside his window. "What time is it?" William asked weakly. "Just past 8 p.m., Christmas Day," the doctor replied. "How's the pain? The surgical pain or the other kind?" William tried to smile, but couldn't. Dr. Reynolds sat down beside the bed. "I've called in a cardiac counselor. Emotional trauma can be as dangerous as physical trauma for heart patients. We'll need to monitor you closely for the next few days." William nodded, staring at the ceiling. "My students, the Christmas concert." "Don't worry about that now," the doctor said firmly. "Your only job is to heal." But healing seemed impossible. Every beep of the heart monitor reminded him that he was alive, while everything he'd built over 22 years was dead. His marriage, his savings, his music school shares, all gone in the time it took to repair his heart. A nurse brought him dinner, holiday turkey with all the trimmings. He couldn't eat a bite. Instead, he lay there, watching snow fall outside his window, wondering how someone could choose Christmas Day to destroy another person's life. The medication eventually pulled him under again, but not before he heard the night nurse whisper to her colleague, "Who leaves their husband during emergency heart surgery? On Christmas? What kind of person does that?" What kind of person indeed, William thought as he drifted off. What kind of person at all? Chapter 3. The Price of Betrayal. 5 days after Christmas, William stood at his front door, fumbling with keys that felt foreign in his trembling hands. The hospital had insisted on a wheelchair discharge, but now he was alone, facing the empty house that no longer felt like home. The first thing he noticed was the silence. No Christmas decorations greeted him. Amanda must have taken them down before leaving. The second was the emptiness. Half the pictures were missing from the walls, leaving pale rectangles on the faded wallpaper. The antique cabinet in the hallway, a family heirloom from Amanda's grandmother, was gone. Walking felt like running a marathon, but William forced himself to check each room. The kitchen still had his coffee mug in the sink from that last morning. The living room was missing the sofa and several chairs. Upstairs, the master bedroom hit him hardest. Amanda's closet stood open and empty, hangers scattered on the floor like abandoned soldiers. The phone rang, making him jump. His hands shook as he answered it. "Mr. Harrison? This is Thomas Webb from First National Bank. We've been trying to reach you regarding some irregular activity in your accounts." William sank into the remaining kitchen chair. How irregular? All joint accounts were emptied on December 24th. Your personal checking account shows several pending medical charges from St. Mary's Hospital. Given the amount, they'll exceed your available balance. The room started spinning. William gripped the kitchen counter. How much are the medical charges? The banker's pause said everything. The initial billing is $218,000. Your insurance covered a portion, but you're still responsible for $147,000. William's legs gave out. He slid to the kitchen floor, still clutching the phone. The surgery that saved his life would now destroy it. "Mr. Harrison, are you there?" "Yes," he managed. "What about my school shares?" Another painful pause. "The shares were transferred to a broker in Boston on Christmas Eve. The transaction appears legitimate. Your wife had joint authorization." After hanging up, William sat on the kitchen floor for what felt like hours. The cat, at least Amanda had left him that, curled up beside him, purring softly. The next blow came in the mail. A letter from Amanda's lawyer detailed the property division she'd generously proposed. She would allow him to keep the house with a mortgage he couldn't possibly afford on a teacher's salary, especially with the medical bills. That night, his first back home, William couldn't sleep. The bedroom felt too big, too empty. Around 3 a.m., he went to his study, the only room that looked untouched. His piano stood silent in the corner, sheet music still open to Silent Night. The next few days brought an avalanche of reality. The hospital bills arrived, along with urgent notices from his credit card companies. Amanda had maxed out their joint cards before leaving. His personal card wouldn't cover even a fraction of the medical bills. A week after returning home, William sat across from a real estate agent in her office. "The market's good," she said kindly. "Your Victorian house should sell quickly." "But are you sure about this?" William nodded, his throat tight. "I don't have a choice." That evening, a for sale sign appeared in his front yard. As he stared at it through his study window, reality finally hit him full force. He would lose the house where he'd lived for 20 years, the garden where he'd planted roses every spring, the study where he'd taught countless piano lessons. His colleague Mike from the music school called to check on him. "You can stay with us until you find a place," he offered. But William couldn't accept. Pride was all he had left. Instead, he found a small apartment near the school, 1 room plus a kitchenette. The rent would stretch his remaining savings thin, but it was all he could afford while trying to handle the medical bills. The day he signed the lease, the apartment manager looked at his rental application with concern. "Your income, these medical bills." "I'll make it work," William said firmly, though he had no idea how. That night in his empty house, William sat at his piano one last time. His fingers found the keys automatically, playing the Christmas carol he never finished that fateful day. Halfway through, he stopped, realizing he'd have to sell the piano too. Everything had a price, it seemed. Even survival. Chapter 4. New Beginnings in D minor. 2 weeks after selling his house, William returned to Burlington Music Academy. Walking through the familiar hallways felt different now. Whispers followed him, and conversations stopped when he passed by. Everyone knew his story. His first class of the day was interrupted by a knock on the door. Janet, the school secretary, stood there with an uncomfortable expression. "William, there's someone from Bradley & Associates law firm here to see you." In the administrator's office, a young lawyer in a suit laid out papers across the desk. "Mrs. Harrison is requesting her portion of the school's value. As a founding member's spouse, she's entitled to." "She already sold her shares," William interrupted, his voice hoarse. "Those were her personal shares. We're discussing her marital portion of your shares." The lawyer slid another document forward. "We've calculated the value at—" "Get out." The school administrator, Tom Parker, stood up. "William's recovering from heart surgery. Any claims can go through our school's legal team." After the lawyer left, Tom turned to William. "They're circling like vultures. We'll fight this." William stared at the papers. "With what money? I can barely afford rent." A commotion in the hallway interrupted them. A teenage boy was arguing loudly with his mother. "I don't want to be here. I hate music." "That's Michael O'Connor," that Tom explained. "Third school this year. Mother's hoping music therapy might help." William watched through the window as the boy kicked a chair. Something in the kid's anger felt familiar. The same rage he'd been suppressing since Christmas. "I'll take him," William said suddenly. "You sure? He's been through 4 teachers already." William nodded. "Schedule him for today." Later that afternoon, Michael slouched into William's classroom, radiating defiance. "Let me guess, you're going to change my life with the power of music?" "No," William replied, closing the piano lid. "I'm having a pretty terrible year myself. How about we just sit here and be miserable together?" Michael blinked, caught off guard by the honesty. That same day, during his advanced class, William noticed a young Asian girl staying after everyone left, practicing the same piece repeatedly. "You're Sarah Chen?" he asked, recognizing the name from his roster. She nodded shyly. "I'm sorry about what happened at the Christmas concert. I was the one who screamed when you—" "Collapsed on the piano?" William managed a small smile. "Well, at least someone noticed." Sarah didn't laugh. Instead, she said, "I've been practicing that carol, the one we never finished. Would you like to hear it?" As Sarah played, William closed his eyes. The music brought back that moment, the pain, the fear, the abandonment. But something else too. Something that felt like hope. A knock on the door shattered the moment. Janet stood there again, looking even more uncomfortable than before. "William, there's another legal notice, and the bank called about the medical bills." That evening, alone in his small apartment, William sorted through the growing pile of demands and threats. Amanda's lawyers wanted more than he'd ever be able to pay. The hospital was threatening collections. The school board was concerned about the legal complications. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I miss you. Can we talk? A." William stared at the message until his vision blurred. Then he blocked the number. The next day, he threw himself into teaching with renewed determination. Michael O'Connor actually showed up for his lesson, though he spent most of it glaring at the piano. Sarah Chen practiced during every free period, her dedication reminding William of his own early days in music. But the whispers continued. He overheard 2 teachers in the break room. "Did you see the society photos? Amanda at some charity gala in Boston dripping in diamonds. Meanwhile, he's living in that tiny apartment." William walked past without acknowledging them. He had classes to teach, students who needed him. Michael was actually touching the piano keys now, though he pretended not to care. Sarah was working on a challenging piece for the spring recital. Music had always been his salvation. Now it would have to be enough. Even if he could barely afford the rent, even if Amanda's lawyers took everything else, even if his colleagues looked at him with pity. He had his students. He had his music. Some days, that almost felt like enough. Chapter 5, Growing Pains. 5 years later, in 2010, William sat in the school board meeting, listening as Tom Parker announced his retirement as department head. "We'll be accepting applications for the position over the next month," Tom said, his eyes briefly meeting William's. After the meeting, several teachers gathered in small groups, whispering. William caught fragments. Too risky. After everything that happened, personal issues. Robert Matthews, the ambitious theory teacher, approached William with a practiced smile. "I assume you won't be applying? Given your situation." "My situation?" William kept his voice level. The ongoing legal battles, the financial concerns, leading the department requires a certain stability. That evening, William stared at the department head application on his small apartment desk. His credit had finally recovered enough to rent a better place, but he still lived in the same one-room apartment, using every spare dollar to pay off medical bills. His phone rang. Sarah Chen's mother. "William, she got in. Full scholarship to Juilliard." The news lifted his spirits. Sarah had practiced relentlessly for 3 years, often staying late while William worked on budget proposals for the department head position. Another call came minutes later, Michael O'Connor's mother crying happy tears. "He won the state composition contest. He said to tell you he still hates music, but thanks." William smiled, remembering the angry teenager who'd kicked chairs in the hallway. Now Michael was writing symphonies, though he still pretended not to care. The next morning, a familiar face appeared in his classroom doorway. Amanda's lawyer. "The court date is set for next month. Mrs. Harrison Maxwell feels she's entitled to a portion of your potential promotion." William gripped his desk. "She left 5 years ago, but her initial investment helped build the school's reputation. Mr. Maxwell, however, is willing to settle. Get out." William's voice shook. Later that day, William overheard 2 parents talking. "Did you see the article? Her new husband lost millions in some bad investments. They're selling their Boston mansion." He pushed the gossip aside, focusing instead on his application. The department needed modernization, new programs, community outreach. He'd been planning this for years, in between teaching and paying bills. A week later, the school board met to interview candidates. Robert Matthews presented first, promising revolutionary changes and elite status. When William's turn came, he simply laid out his students' achievements and his vision for making music accessible to more children. During the questions, Robert struck. Shouldn't the department head have a more stable personal life? Mr. Harrison's recent history. Recent history? Sarah Chen's voice interrupted from the doorway. She stood there in her Juilliard acceptance jacket. "You mean how he kept teaching us while rebuilding his life? How he never missed a lesson despite everything?" Michael O'Connor appeared beside her. "He taught me when 4 other teachers quit. Made me believe in myself when I didn't." The board chairman cleared his throat. "Well, I think we've heard enough." 2 days later, William received the call. He'd gotten the position. His first action as department head was to create a scholarship fund for underprivileged students. That evening, alone in his apartment, William finally opened a letter he'd been avoiding. The hospital's final bill had been paid off. 5 years of living on bare minimums, teaching extra lessons, saving every penny, finally over. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Congratulations on the promotion. I always believed in you." William deleted it without responding. He had a department to run, students to teach, and a future to build. The past could stay where it belonged, behind him. Another text came through, a photo from Sarah's Juilliard orientation. She was standing in front of the famous building, beaming. Michael sent one too, his composition being performed at the state finals. This, William thought, was worth more than any mansion in Boston. Chapter 6. Seeds of Success. 10 years after that fateful Christmas, William sat in his office at Burlington Music Academy, staring at an unexpected proposition. The Burlington Grand Hotel, the city's most prestigious venue, was quietly looking for investors before going public with a sale. "It's a solid investment opportunity," Sarah Chen said through the speakerphone. Now a rising star at the New York Philharmonic, she'd learned about the deal through her connections. "The current owners want to sell to local investors first." William rubbed his temples. "Sarah, the down payment alone." "That's why I'm calling," she interrupted. "Several of your former students want to invest together, with you as the managing partner." Later that day, Michael O'Connor called. His latest Broadway show was breaking records, and he'd heard about the hotel opportunity. "Consider it payback for all those lessons you gave me for free when Mom couldn't afford them." William paced his office. The hotel was the city's premier performance venue. Controlling it could secure the school's future. But using his students' money, a knock interrupted his thoughts. The school secretary handed him a magazine. "Thought you should see this." The society pages showed Amanda at a Boston charity event, quoted discussing her humble beginnings teaching music in Vermont. William's jaw tightened. She'd never taught a single lesson. His phone buzzed with an email from Tom Parker, his retired predecessor. Developers eyeing the academy's block might want to think about protection. The threat to the school's future made his decision clearer. That afternoon, William met with the hotel's investment banker. "I'm interested, but I have conditions." 2 months later, the deal was done. William and a group of his former students became silent partners in the Burlington Grand Hotel. The press release didn't mention their names, exactly as he'd planned. Sarah performed her first hometown concert in the hotel's grand ballroom that spring. "Weird playing here, knowing you're technically my boss now," she teased backstage. "I'm not anyone's boss," William corrected. "Just protecting what matters." Michael premiered his new musical there that summer. "Still hate music," he said with a grin, accepting the standing ovation. William kept teaching, kept living in his modest apartment, kept investing his savings carefully. The hotel investment opened other opportunities, small at first, then larger. One morning, his secretary brought in another magazine, Amanda and Richard Maxwell at a gallery opening, the caption noting their recent downsizing to a charming Boston brownstone. William dropped the magazine in his recycling bin. He had more important things to focus on. The school's scholarship program was expanding. His students were succeeding. The hotel investment was paying off better than expected. That evening, reviewing the hotel's quarterly reports, William noticed something interesting. The Christmas Eve slot, usually the hotel's biggest event night, was still open. An idea began forming. The school needed a major fundraiser. The hotel needed a signature Christmas event. And he wasn't sure what he needed. But something felt right about this. He called Sarah first. "How's your schedule this Christmas Eve?" "For you, wide open." Michael was next. "A Christmas concert? Seriously?" "Fine, but I'm not playing anything cheerful." As William planned the event, he kept it quiet. No press releases, no announcements, just personal invitations to select guests. His phone buzzed. Another society page notification. "Boston power couple faces financial troubles." He ignored it. The hotel manager stopped by his office. "Sir, about the Christmas Eve event, someone from Boston's been calling, trying to get details." "No information to anyone," William said firmly. "It's just a small school fundraiser." That night, alone in his apartment, William finally opened his safe. Inside lay Amanda's letter from that Christmas Eve 10 years ago. He'd kept it all this time, a reminder of how quickly life could change. Next to it, he placed something new. The hotel's ownership papers, showing his controlling interest through various investment structures. Sometimes success was best served quietly. His phone lit up with a message from Sarah. "Just saw the Boston Globe article about the Maxwells. Are you sure about this Christmas concert?" "More sure than ever," he replied. After all, timing was everything. And 10 years was a long time to plan a perfect Christmas Eve. Chapter 7: Destiny's Symphony. December 2023 arrived with a flurry of activity at the Burlington Grand Hotel. William walked through the grand ballroom, reviewing the setup for the Christmas Eve concert. The stage had been extended, clearly built for more than just a simple fundraiser. The New York Philharmonic's full-string section arrives at noon on the 24th. His event coordinator said, checking her tablet. Miss Chen insisted on handling their arrangements personally. And the Broadway performers? Mr. O'Connor's bringing his entire orchestra. They're booked in the West Wing. William nodded, trying to appear casual about what would be the largest gathering of musical talent Burlington had ever seen. The local papers were already speculating about the mysterious Christmas Eve concert, with tickets selling out minutes after the quiet announcement. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Maxwell investment scandal rocks Boston elite. The article detailed Richard Maxwell's involvement in a massive Ponzi scheme. Investors had lost millions. The FBI was investigating. Later that morning, his secretary hurried into his office. "William, you need to see this." She handed him a society magazine. There was Amanda photographed leaving a courthouse. The caption read, "Mrs. Maxwell seen consulting divorce attorneys amid husband's financial scandal." "There's more," his secretary added hesitantly. "She's been calling the hotel all week, trying to get tickets for the concert." William kept his face neutral. Stick to the guest list we approved. That afternoon, he met with Sarah Chen, who'd flown in early to help coordinate. The orchestra's ready, she said. But are you? I mean, if she shows up. It's been 18 years, William replied, organizing music sheets on his desk. And you've been planning this for at least 10 of them, Sarah pointed out. Ever since you started buying hotel shares. Michael O'Connor burst into the office, interrupting them. Just saw the news about Maxwell. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. His grin faded. But seriously, Will, everyone's talking about Amanda being back in Vermont. William stood up, walking to his window. The hotel's Christmas lights reflected off the fresh snow, reminding him of that night in the hospital. Let them talk. That evening, reviewing the final guest list, William's hand paused over one name, Amanda Maxwell, waiting list. His finger hovered over the delete key. Sarah found him still at his desk hours later. You're keeping her on the waiting list, aren't you? She kept me waiting once, William said quietly, on Christmas Eve. The next few days passed in a blur of preparations. William maintained his regular teaching schedule, but everyone noticed his distraction. The local paper ran a story speculating about the concert, mentioning Amanda's return to Burlington and her connection to the music school. 3 days before Christmas, William received a hand-delivered note. Amanda's handwriting hadn't changed. Please, I need to be there, for old time's sake. He locked the note in his safe with her old letter, next to the hotel ownership documents that would soon become public record. The day before Christmas Eve, during final rehearsals, Michael pulled William aside. The orchestra's been asking questions about that Christmas carol, the one we never finished that night. Are you sure about this? William watched the musicians practicing on stage, former students from 20 years of teaching, now successful artists in their own right. I'm sure. That night, alone in his office, William finally opened a file he'd kept sealed for years. Inside were the original ownership papers for the music school, proving Amanda had never owned any shares. She'd lied about that, too. Just like she'd lied about selling them before leaving. His phone lit up with another news alert. Maxwell assets frozen. Wife claims ignorance of scheme. The photo showed Amanda leaving another courthouse, her designer clothes noticeably less pristine than in previous pictures. William closed the article and opened his email. In his draft folder sat a single message, written 10 years ago, but never sent. Tomorrow, it would finally serve its purpose. Outside his window, snow began falling on Burlington, just like that Christmas Eve 18 years ago. But this time, William wasn't the one in the hospital. This time, he wasn't the one waiting. This time, everything was exactly as planned. Chapter 8, The Reunion. Christmas Eve at the Burlington Grand Hotel buzzed with anticipation. The ballroom gleamed with subtle decorations, the stage set for what the local paper called the musical event of the decade. William adjusted his tie backstage, watching the crowd through a small gap in the curtains. The city's elite filled the seats, their conversations creating a steady hum. Then he saw her. Amanda stood in the entrance, clutching her purse like a shield. At 65, she was still striking, but her designer outfit couldn't hide the strain around her eyes. She hesitated, then showed her last-minute ticket to the usher. You actually gave her a seat, Sarah whispered, appearing beside him. Front row center, William replied. The best view in the house. The lights dimmed, signaling the start. William walked to the piano, his steps steady. He'd performed hundreds of times since that Christmas Eve 18 years ago, but never like this. His fingers touched the keys, ready to play the opening notes of Silent Night, the carol they'd never finished. Then he saw her face clearly in the stage lights. His hands froze. The room tilted slightly. Suddenly, he was back in that hospital bed, reading her letter, feeling his heart break all over again. For 5 endless seconds, no one moved, no one breathed. William stared at the keys, his hands trembling visibly. Then Sarah's violin began playing, soft, supportive, giving him time. Michael's orchestra joined seamlessly, covering the moment. William closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began playing. The carol flowed from his fingers, but different now, stronger, richer, woven with 18 years of survival and success. He didn't look at Amanda again during the first half. Instead, he watched his students, current and former, perform with the precision that only years of dedication could produce. Every piece told part of his story, though only a few people in the audience understood the full meaning. During intermission, he stayed at the piano, reviewing notes for the second half. A movement caught his eye. Amanda, standing from her seat. "William?" Her voice was tentative, nothing like the confident tone he remembered. "The performance is beautiful." He looked up, meeting her eyes directly for the first time in 18 years. The confident socialite from the magazine photos was gone. In her place stood someone he didn't recognize. "Thank you for the ticket," she continued, her fingers twisting her program. "When I heard about the concert, I thought maybe it was a sign." William's hands rested on the piano keys. One push would start the next piece, would drown out whatever she was trying to say. "You look well," she tried again. "The school must be doing wonderfully. I saw the article about your students' successes." "Did you see the articles about Richard too?" The words came out before he could stop them. Amanda flinched. I should have known. About his investments, about everything." She glanced around the opulent ballroom. "This place, it's amazing what you've built. Built back." He corrected quietly. "After losing everything." The stage manager appeared, signaling 5 minutes until the second half. Amanda stepped closer to the piano. "Could we talk? After? There's so much I need to explain." William stood, straightening his jacket. 18 years ago, I had tubes in my chest and monitors beeping in my ears when I read your explanation. I think that was enough." He moved past her toward the conductor's podium. Behind him, he heard her quick intake of breath, as if she'd been struck. "Please," she whispered, "just a few minutes." William turned, facing her fully. "You'll want to return to your seat. The second half is about to begin." His voice was steady, professional. "You wouldn't want to miss the ending. Not this time." As Amanda made her way back to her seat, William caught Sarah's knowing smile from the first violin chair. Michael stood in the wings, giving him a subtle thumbs up. The lights dimmed again. William raised his baton. The real performance was about to begin. Chapter 9: The True Wealth. During the second half's final piece, Amanda slipped out of her seat and made her way backstage. She found William in his office, reviewing papers that looked suspiciously like property documents. "They said this was your office," she said, closing the door behind her. "Though I didn't know you had an office here." William set the papers aside. "There's a lot you don't know. I know I made a mistake." Amanda moved closer to his desk. "Richard, he's not who I thought he was. The money's gone, William, all of it. The FBI froze everything." "Sit down," William said quietly, gesturing to a chair. "You look tired." Amanda sank into the chair, her composure cracking. "I'm worse than tired. I'm ruined. Richard's facing prison. The house, the cars, the accounts, everything's gone. I didn't know where else to go. So you came back to Burlington, to me. You always knew how to fix things." Her voice cracked. "Remember when the school was struggling? You found a way. You always found a way." William opened his desk drawer and removed 2 envelopes. One was yellowed with age, its edges worn. The other was crisp and new. "Do you recognize this?" He held up the old envelope. Amanda's face paled. "My letter, from that night. I kept it, to remind myself." William placed it on the desk. "Would you like to read it again?" "Please don't." "No? Let me remind you then. You left me in the hospital, tubes in my chest, to run away with Richard because he offered you the life you always wanted." William's voice remained calm. "How's that life working out?" "I was wrong," Amanda whispered. "So wrong, but we could start over. You're successful now, we could—" "Stop!" William pushed the new envelope across the desk. "This is for you." Amanda opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter and a check. Her eyes widened as she read. "That's the exact amount you took from our accounts that Christmas Eve," William explained. "Not adjusted for inflation. Not a penny more or less. I don't understand. It's your way out. Enough to rent a small apartment. Start over, like I had to. But I saw the articles about your success. The school, this hotel, you must be worth." "What I'm worth isn't relevant," William interrupted. "That check equals what you thought I was worth 18 years ago, when you left me in the hospital on Christmas Eve." Amanda stared at the check, tears falling. "I can't survive on this." "I did." William stood up. "I sold the house, moved to a one-room apartment, paid off medical bills for 5 years, built everything back from nothing." "William, please. We were married for 22 years. That must mean something." It meant everything, until it meant nothing to you. He walked to the door. The concert's ending. I need to get back. Wait, Amanda grabbed his arm. At least tell me how you did all this. The hotel, the success. William gently removed her hand. I did it the way I've done everything in my life, with hard work, honesty, and faith in people who proved worthy of trust. He opened the door. From the ballroom, they could hear the orchestra beginning the final piece. Goodbye, Amanda. Use the money wisely this time. That's it. Her voice rose. After 18 years, that's all you have to say? William paused in the doorway. Actually, there is one more thing. He turned back. Richard didn't lose your money in a Ponzi scheme. He's been transferring it to accounts in the Cayman Islands for months. My lawyers found the trail last week. The FBI will have the documents tomorrow morning. Amanda's face went white. How do you know this? Because, William said softly, some of us actually learned how to manage money honestly. He checked his watch. You might want to call your lawyer. Merry Christmas, Amanda. He closed the door behind him, walking toward the stage where his real family waited. Students and colleagues who had stood by him through everything. The sound of Amanda's muffled sobs faded behind him as the orchestra's music grew louder with each step. Chapter 10. The concert. William returned to the stage just as Sarah finished her violin solo. The audience sat in rapt attention, unaware of the drama that had just unfolded backstage. He took his place at the conductor's podium, raising his baton for what appeared to be the final piece. Then Michael O'Connor stepped forward, addressing the audience. We've prepared something special for tonight. He glanced at William. A piece that was never finished, 18 years ago. The stage doors opened. Students began filing in, not just the current orchestra, but faces William hadn't seen in years. Former students, now professional musicians, walked in holding their instruments. They filled the extended stage that had seemed too large earlier. Sarah stepped to the microphone. Every person on this stage has a story about Mr. Harrison. How he believed in them when no one else did. How he taught them when their families couldn't afford lessons. How he never gave up on them, even when they wanted to give up on themselves. William lowered his baton, staring at the gathering crowd of musicians. He recognized them all. Thomas Chen, Sarah's younger brother, now with the Boston Symphony. Maria Rodriguez, who toured with major orchestras. James Miller, who composed for films. Michael took the microphone again. 18 years ago, a Christmas Eve concert was interrupted. Tonight, we're going to finish it. The musicians raised their instruments. Without a conductor's cue, they began playing Silent Night, but not the simple carol version. This was Michael's arrangement, complex and moving, weaving in themes from every student's journey. William stood motionless as the music swelled around him. He caught glimpses of faces in the audience, colleagues who'd supported him, parents who'd trusted him with their children's education, community members who'd stood by the school. In the back of the hall, Amanda stood near the exit, watching. Even from a distance, he could see the tears on her face. She turned and walked out, her steps masked by the music. The arrangement built to its climax, dozens of musicians playing together as if they'd rehearsed for months instead of gathering secretly over the past few days. William recognized pieces of each student's story in the music. Michael's anger turned to passion, Sarah's shy confidence blooming into brilliance. The audience rose to their feet before the final notes faded. The applause was thunderous, but William barely heard it. He was looking at his students, current and former, young and established, all united on his stage. Sarah stepped forward again, holding something covered with a cloth. We have one more surprise. She unveiled a bronze plaque. This will hang in the school's main hall. It reads, "The William Harrison School of Music, where every note matters." The audience's applause grew louder. William gripped the podium, overwhelmed. He hadn't known about this part. The school board voted unanimously, Michael announced. It's official as of tonight. William finally found his voice. But I never wanted. We know, Sarah interrupted with a smile. That's exactly why you deserve it. The musicians raised their instruments again, playing the school song, another of Michael's compositions. The audience remained standing, many wiping tears as they recognized the theme of second chances and redemption woven through the music. From his position on stage, William could see every face, every smile, every nod of appreciation. This, he realized, was what real success looked like. Not bank accounts or property deeds, but lives touched and changed. The music swelled to its finale, and William finally raised his baton, conducting the last few measures. As the final notes rang out, he looked at the empty seat in the front row where Amanda had sat earlier. Some endings, he realized, were really beginnings in disguise. Chapter 11: The Family We Choose. After the applause finally died down, the ballroom transformed into a celebration space. Students from different generations mingled, sharing stories and memories. William moved through the crowd, accepting hugs and congratulations, still processing the evening's events. "Speech," someone called out. Others joined in until William found himself back on stage, facing his extended musical family. "I don't know what to say," he began, looking at the faces before him. 18 years ago, I thought I'd lost everything. I was wrong. I hadn't found everything yet." Sarah Chen stood up. "Tell them about my first lesson. When I was so scared, I couldn't even touch the piano." "You weren't scared," William smiled. "You were determining if I was worth your time." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Other students began sharing their own stories. "Remember when I threw my music sheets across the room?" Michael called out. He just picked them up and said, "Nice distance, but your aim needs work." More stories followed. Moments of frustration turned to triumph. Fears transformed into confidence. Dreams that seemed impossible becoming reality. William listened, amazed at how clearly they all remembered these small moments he'd almost forgotten. Through the ballroom's windows, snow began falling. William noticed Amanda standing outside, watching the celebration through the glass. Their eyes met briefly before she turned and walked away, disappearing into the snowy night. Thomas Chen, now a renowned conductor himself, raised his glass. "To the man who taught us that music isn't just about playing notes. It's about playing through life's hard measures until you find your own symphony." To William, the crowd echoed. Maria Rodriguez, who'd toured with 3 major orchestras, stepped forward with an envelope. "We have one more surprise. We've established a scholarship fund in your name. Full rides for students who can't afford lessons." William opened the envelope, stunned by the amount. "This is too much." "Actually," Sarah interjected, "it's just the beginning. We're all committing to annual contributions. No child will be turned away from your school for financial reasons ever again." The celebration continued into the night. Former students performed impromptu duets. Current students watched in awe as their professional counterparts played pieces they were still struggling to master. Near midnight, William slipped away to his office. He needed a moment alone to absorb everything. On his desk sat Amanda's unopened letter from 18 years ago, next to the new one he'd given her tonight. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Sarah, Michael, and a group of his oldest students entered. "We saw her outside," Sarah said quietly. "Are you okay?" William looked at the letters on his desk. "You know what's strange? 18 years ago, this was all I had left." He picked up Amanda's old letter. "Now it's just paper." "Because you built something better," Michael said. "Something she can't take away." "We're your family," Sarah added. "The family that chose you and that you chose back." William looked at his students, now successful adults with their own careers and achievements. They'd come back, not for the music, not for the school, but for him. "What do you say we finish this Christmas Eve properly?" he suggested. "The piano's still waiting." They returned to the ballroom. The crowd had thinned, but dozens remained. Without announcement, William sat at the piano and began playing Silent Night, the simple version this time. One by one, voices joined in, filling the grand space with harmony. Outside, the snow continued falling on Burlington, covering everything in clean white. Through the window, William could no longer see Amanda's footprints in the snow. They'd been covered, erased, just like the pain of that long-ago Christmas Eve. He had something better now. Something real. Something chosen. Chapter 12. The Most Precious Gift. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright over Burlington. William arrived early at the hotel's restaurant, where he'd arranged breakfast for the students who'd stayed overnight. The tables had been pushed together to form one long family-style setting. Sarah Chen was already there, reading the morning news on her phone. "Did you see this? FBI raids Maxwell investment offices. offshore accounts discovered. William poured himself coffee. That didn't take long. You knew, Sarah said, not a question. That's why you gave her that check last night. Everyone deserves a chance to start over, William replied, even if they don't deserve more than that. More students arrived, filling the room with chatter and laughter. Michael O'Connor walked in last, looking surprisingly awake. So, about the school reaming, we're not discussing that. William cut him off but smiled, too late. Michael handed him the local paper. There on the front page, Burlington Music Academy renamed to honor local teachers' legacy. As they ate breakfast, students shared their plans. Sarah was premiering with the Philharmonic next month. Michael's new show was opening in spring. Others had concerts, recordings, teaching positions of their own. What about you? Thomas Chen asked William. What's next? William looked around the table. The scholarship program needs organizing. We'll have new students starting next semester. That's work, Michael interrupted. He asked what's next for you. William was quiet for a moment. For 18 years, I've been working toward last night, making sure I could stand on that stage and know I'd built something real, something that couldn't be taken away. And now? Sarah pressed. Now I can focus on building something new, something bigger than just success or security. He shared his vision, expanding the school's outreach, partnering with public schools, creating community programs. The students listened, then began adding their own ideas. I'll run master classes during my off-season, Sarah offered. My foundation can fund after-school programs, Michael added. As they planned, William thought about Amanda's words from last night, about fixing things, about starting over. She'd never understood that success wasn't about fixing or rebuilding what was lost. It was about creating something entirely new. Later that morning, William walked through the school's empty halls. The new plaque hung prominently in the entrance, catching the winter sunlight. He traced the letters of his name, remembering the scared students who'd first walked through these doors, now replaced by confident musicians. His phone buzzed, a news alert about Richard Maxwell's arrest, another about Amanda being questioned by federal investigators. He deleted both without reading them. Instead, he opened his email and began writing to his students. Current ones this time, children still learning their first notes. The scholarship announcement would go out today. No more families struggling to afford lessons, no more talent lost to circumstance. Sarah found him in his office later, still writing. The others are heading out. Flights to catch, shows to perform. Life goes on, William nodded. That's what you taught us, isn't it? To keep playing, no matter what? He looked up at her. No longer the frightened girl who'd screamed when he collapsed, but a strong, accomplished woman. You taught me that too. All of you did. As the sun set on Christmas Day, William sat at his old piano in the school, the same one he'd been playing 18 years ago when his life changed. His fingers found the keys of Silent Night, playing it through to the end this time. The music echoed through the empty halls, but William wasn't thinking about the past anymore. He was thinking about next semester's students, about futures waiting to be shaped, about music yet to be played. Sometimes the most precious gifts aren't the ones we receive, but the ones we give. And sometimes the most important family isn't the one we're born into or marry into, but the one we build, note by note, lesson by lesson, heart by heart. The snow started falling again as William finished playing. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, new music. But tonight, in the quiet of his school, surrounded by the legacy of love and dedication he'd built, William Harrison was exactly where he belonged. The most precious gift, he realized, had been there all along. The gift of choosing what matters and letting the rest fade away like footprints in the snow. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Did you ever experience a moment where loss turned into an unexpected blessing? Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of triumph, redemption, and the extraordinary strength of the human spirit. Remember, sometimes what seems like an ending is just life's way of making room for a more beautiful symphony.